Welcome to CRE Success, the podcast, where we help people working in commercial real estate achieve their professional goals. Check us out online at cresuccess.co/podcast. And now here's your host, Darren Krakowiak.
Welcome to episode 19 in season 2 of CRE Success, the podcast. My special guest today is Paul Roos. It is no exaggeration to say that Paul Roos is one of the most influential people in Australian rules football in the last 40 years. Highly regarded and universally respected. He's got too many accolades to mention, but here's some that you should know. Roosy's playing career span 356 games for 2 clubs. He's been a club captain for many of those years, and he's a 7-time All-Australian. He is one of the game's most highly regarded coaches, known for building a high-performance team culture at Sydney, where he oversaw a premiership win after just 3 years at the helm. And then he transformed the fortunes at Melbourne Football Club, and currently he's serving in a mentor role at the North Melbourne Football Club. He's been one of the best special commentators in the business when he has been in the media, and his leadership prowess has seen him be one of the co-founders at Performance by Design, where he is also, appropriately, their head coach. I'm very pleased to be speaking to Paul Roos today, all about leadership in business. My interview with Roosy starts in 30 seconds. 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years. CRE is a business intelligence and analytics tool for commercial real estate professionals. Using real-time insights, track key portfolio metrics and benchmark against the market so you can make faster and well-informed decisions. With live dashboards and bespoke reporting, impress both your executive team and your property clients. It's time to turn data into your most valuable asset with CRE from Released.
And now it's time for the interview on CRE Success, the podcast.
Roosy, welcome to CRE Success, the podcast.
Oh, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
First thing we do in all of our interviews is step into the virtual elevator, and we've got to hear our guests give their elevator pitch. So, Paul, who are you?
Yeah, I guess I'm an ex-professional athlete, well, semi-professional at the start, playing footy, coaching the Swans and then Melbourne Footy Clubs. Probably consider myself really much in the leadership space, run a company called Performance by Design, do some business, small business, medium business retreats, nurture group retreats, which are sort of on hold a bit. Really stepped into that space and probably trying to share the 40 years of knowledge I've had through working and then through AFL footy and through coaching and sort of spread the word to a lot of corporates around Australia, and we've got an international arm as well to our business. So that's probably in a quick summary who I am.
Awesome. So what type of companies does Performance by Design work with?
Yeah, pretty much everyone. People ask us that a bit. If it's a bigger company, we typically work with the leadership teams. Smaller startups and family companies, we get a chance to work with everyone, which is really cool. So, and anywhere in between, often we'll work with the bigger companies, exec teams, and then the GM managers, and then we'll get down. We've also got an institute now, which is an online learning platform, which we actually are able to get to more people within the organisation. So really all industries, all sizes, anyone that wants to, the way we talk about it is taking the chance out of culture. So anyone that really wants to take the chance out of their culture and shape their culture. We also talk about role model leaders. So they're probably our main principles, and then we build platforms around that. So people have got a really clear understanding of what their company values are, what their behaviours are, and will they act their way into the system or they act their way out of the system.
And with all the restrictions when it comes to face-to-face interactions, is it more difficult for companies to build culture now than it was pre-pandemic?
Yeah, look, it's certainly been a huge topic. So we've actually adjusted quickly last year. One of our bigger clients really wanted to get stuck in with their GMs, and we changed our one-day workshop to a 2.5 hour. Worked really, really well. So now we're well equipped now to bounce in and out of face-to-faces, virtual, Zoom calls. So we're really ticking over most of our companies really nicely now. And at some point we get face-to-face if we start virtual, or if we start face-to-face, we have to tip into virtual, and we do that as well, sort of thing. So, but it's certainly something that our leaders that we were dealing with are really concerned about. The lack of connection with working at home, the lack of collaboration working from home, working in silos is always a challenge, but you can imagine what it's like now that everyone's at home. So we're doing a lot of work around that.
Excellent. Well, I've seen the videos that you post on LinkedIn, so I can see you've got your head around Zoom. So, and that's how I came across really understanding more of what you're doing at Performance by Design. But I know a lot of our listeners who even remotely follow AFL will, of course, know you as the leader's leader or perhaps the coach's mentor. And I've noticed that a lot of the real focus that you've had in interviews has been around the people elements of leadership, the importance of relationships, understanding roles and responsibilities, and the role of culture. What I wanted to ask you with that framing is, what do you think are the common parallels between team sports leadership and performance, and then leadership and performance in a corporate context?
Yeah, well, as I said, when I first started, we were sort of part-time, so probably not as much, because we go down to training, get there at 4:30, train for 2.5 hours as hard as you possibly can, and then get out of there. As we moved into the mid-90s, when it became fully professional, and when I took over as coach, it was a fully professional industry. Now, incredibly similar. What we take from sport is probably the immediacy of sport. Sport is a high-pressure environment. The results are on the Monday paper. So if you don't change really quickly, going from a top-down based organisation to relationships you mentioned, empathy, empowerment, leadership, you don't survive in AFL football. You can survive longer in the corporate world because there's not the accountability around it, but eventually you're going to get caught out. So enormously similar. Probably the other biggest difference is the amount of time football clubs spend on their culture compared to corporates. It'd be 10 to 1. For every, my business colleague, Jared Murphy's running the leadership program at North Melbourne. I mean, he would have been in there since November probably 40 times. Now in that same period, if you get a really good company, you might be in there in the space of 9 months, 4 times. So it's 10 times the amount of contact hours that you get at a sporting club because of the immediacy of needing to get to your goal really quickly.
You mentioned there about how professional sports teams and AFL is as an industry now, but of course in the 80s and 90s, I guess that was still emerging when you were first a club captain. And I'm guessing back then there wasn't as much of a huge focus on leadership skills development, and perhaps it was more sort of lead from the front. So I'm curious to know, how did you actually learn about leadership, and how have you developed and honed those skills over time?
Yeah, the first part's probably the key to it, to be perfectly frank, because what I realised, as you said, there was nothing on the wall, there was no leadership groups, there was nothing about empowerment. It was really just top down. Wolsey was my first coach. We had 60, 70, 80 players turn up for pre-season. So what I realised pretty quickly, leadership is about role modelling behaviours. Now, they can be bad behaviours, and then you've got bad culture. But I was really lucky at Fitzroy that I had really good leaders, really good role models. So that's the first point. So to any of the leaders listening, if you're in a leadership role, you have to be a role model. Don't ask people to do things that you won't do yourself. The second part of the question is really just honing that over 17 years of playing. And then I wrote some notes down when I finished playing October 1998 about the things I liked about my leaders, the things I didn't like about my leaders, and then starting to think about, what is empowerment? Why don't we get players more involved in decision-making at footy clubs? So the concept sort of evolved over time. And then I ran into my current business partner, 2002, 2003. And that's when we embarked on the leadership program at the Sydney Swans. And then it really came to life for me, exactly how it works, exactly how it's shaped. And now the things that are more mainstream, we started doing them back in 2003, leadership groups, building strong relationships, showing great empathy, having really honest conversations. Now you walk through, even a bad footy club now does that reasonably well.
When you stepped up as captain Fitzroy back in the late 80s, was that your first leadership role, or had you been a natural leader as a younger man in high school or elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I might have only captained one team in Beverly Hills. I was captain of the Victorian state basketball team on a couple of occasions, but but probably more just a good player, that I played well, had pretty good habits, good. My parents were both tennis players, so we were always around sport and all that sort of stuff. So not necessarily, but I had a good lens. As I said, going to the tennis club every weekend. I remember two guys that stand out for me: Kevin Roos, who's an actual AFL player and coach, and his doubles partner Barry Bryant. So even watching those two guys, the way they competed, over and over and over again. So I think just the exposure I had to basketball, to football, to tennis, to my parents' friends and all that, probably allowed me to develop some leadership capabilities. But it wasn't until I got to Fitzroy that I saw Gary Wilson, Bernie Quinlan, Laurie Serafini, Mickey Conlon, that I sort of started to shape what a leader was. And then you sort of get thrust into it. I think I was like 23 or 24 at captain. And then your main obligation then is to try and play as well as you possibly can. And then, as it turned out, it wasn't great at the time, but because we went through so many really bad periods at Fitzroy with no money and a lot of problems, I was the one that the players were calling. So then you develop another level of empathy and leadership and starting to think outside yourself, and you start to think more about your teammates. So that's probably how it really evolved over the years.
And of course, when you stepped into the head coach role at Sydney, you were an assistant coach who became a caretaker coach and ultimately became the coach. And how did you know that you were ready to step into that role and take on that role at the time? Because it's such a huge role. And, the path towards being a head coach is, I guess there's many different ways to get there, but your path was quite quick. So how did you gain that confidence to take on that responsibility?
I think in hindsight, probably those experiences I've talked about. 1998, I went overseas. 99, and lived with my parents, my wife's parents, and went to the Chicago Bears, Chicago Bulls, San Francisco 49ers, Denver Broncos. I got an opportunity to work with Pete Sampras, my best mate, Brett Stevens, one of my mates, was his fitness coach. I think I was sort of subconsciously developing those skills without really knowing that I was going to be a coach, sitting down at October 1998, writing down the things I liked about my coaches, things I didn't like about my coaches, and then making a decision at the end. I worked on the Olympics for C7, ironically, 2000, and then I got an offer to be full-time coach, defensive coach at Sydney. So whilst I never really knew whether I'd be a senior coach, when I look back, I think I was always formulating a plan. What I encourage leaders to do now is take a lot of notes. I wish I had done that, but take a lot of notes, write down some things during your day, during your week. And then, it was really a whirlwind when I got the job. Rodney Eade left on the Monday. They asked me to coach on the Tuesday. I had to make the decision by Wednesday. Thankfully we had a bye that following weekend. So I guess I only really consciously decided when the opportunity came, but I think the preparation had been going for a long period of time.
I know you've had experience coming into organisations and helping them develop high performance cultures, and obviously Melbourne is the very high profile example of that, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of it behind the scenes and also what you're doing at Performance by Design. What are some things that you're focused on when it comes to diagnosing issues as an incoming leader or as a mentor, as you're currently doing at North Melbourne?
Yeah, certainly from a corporate point of view, firstly, it's really watching the workshops, observing. The first day is probably our audit. When we actually really get to work with the leaders, we get to see the interaction, we get to see the body language, we get to hear the conversation. So you get a really good snapshot on the first day, or if we're doing it virtually, the first sort of 2.5 hours. And sometimes we overcomplicate culture. Culture is just about the actions of what we see. So if we see people turning up on time, if we see really good engagement, if we see really honest conversation, then we know we've walked into a pretty good culture. If we see people, 9 o'clock, we start, 9:15, we're still waiting, 9:20, we get to start. A lot of silence when we ask questions. Body language, you can sort of tell, should I say something? I don't think the CEO want to hear that. Then we know we've walked into a bad culture. So it's really the observation that I love. And I sort of love the face-to-face when you've got the half an hour when everyone turns up, because you can learn a lot before the workshop starts as well. So that's really our diagnostic tool, as well as pre-workshop, we talk a lot to the leaders, the people around. We also have a care factor survey, which we send out to our clients, which gives them an opportunity to send to their staff. So we'll get a really good understanding of what that looks like as well.
You've been part of some very successful succession plans, obviously with Simon Goodwin in Melbourne, and we've seen recently one that hasn't gone so smoothly, and plenty of examples of that in the sports and the corporate world. I guess I want to ask you, what have you found underpins one, creating that deep bench of talent so, the legacy can live on, but also how do you ultimately allow for that smooth transition of power when the time is right?
Yeah, I think the first part is not enough companies develop their people in a leadership sense. When we typically work with companies, we know they're technically really good. So if we're working with a car manufacturer or whatever, we know they're technically really good at what they do. If we're working with an IT company, we know they're technically really good. I think what corporations can spend more time on is leadership. You touched on empathy. What does empathy mean? Authenticity, empowerment, roles, all those sorts of things. So that's probably the big thing that I would say on that is just, make sure you're getting that part of it right as well. So people feel like you're upskilling them while they're in the job. And then if you do that really well, the succession plan becomes a lot easier. So with John Longmire, at Sydney, John and I pretty much started our journey together. I'd been there a couple of years before him. He came in as assistant coach, but when I was coach, he was my assistant. So we pretty much built everything collectively. And when it was time for me to leave, I recognised that, it was time for me to move on, and the club recognised John was going to be. So that was a really easy, smooth transition. And I think that's part of it. What I would say is let's not confuse, and I don't want to be controversial, but let's not confuse the Collingwood and the Hawthorn succession plans as succession plans, because they're sackings and replacing someone within that organisation. So that's not a succession plan. That's sort of an easy way to sort of say to Mick Malthouse, we don't want you, but we want you to stay for a year, and an easy way to say to Alistair Clarkson, we want to put Sam Mitchell in, so it's a bit of a soft landing. So when you've got two quality coaches like Malthouse and Clarkson, it's bizarre that you would treat them the way both those footy clubs treated them. So in a normal succession plan, it can be seamless because the CEO is saying, yes, I'm moving on. We've got a great CFO. We've got a great, head of marketing. We've worked together for a long period of time. The next 12 months is going to be about me easing them in. And it's really seamless, to be perfectly frank. The others don't work quite as well as we've seen.
Yeah, I guess succession plans are only succession plans if everyone's on board with the plan.
Yeah, that's right.
And obviously at Melbourne Footy Club, you were really coming in to pass over the reins after, I think, 2 or 3 years, right? So you were always on board with the plan. Yeah,
and that part of going to Melbourne, which was slightly different at Sydney, was, yes, the succession plan was on from day one. Yes, I will come in. We'll reshape the organisation. We'll get it to a point where we possibly can, and we'll get someone in that can take it to the next level. So that was a different part, but certainly driven by me, accepted by Peter Jackson, Glenn Bartlett, who did an amazing job, both of them, to contribute to an enormous turnaround the footy club. Todd Viney, Josh Marnie, all the coaches I brought in. And then we appointed Simon after my first year. He had 2 years to really learn the craft and then take the club to the next level.
And they're, I think, third position right now. So it's looking good in 2021. Let's talk about leaving organisations on good terms. I don't know if it's been your specific intention, but it seems like an outcome for you has been being able to leave on good terms. And what's some advice that you can give people when they leave an organisation to make sure they don't burn their bridges on the way out the door?
Self-awareness is probably the most underrated skill for me. I think too often we get caught up in our own importance. I mean, we also have to feed our kids and put food on the table and clothe and pay mortgage and stuff like that. And I think it also leads us down a path of knowing we're not doing a great job or knowing someone else can do something better. But we hang on and we bite and scratch and fight, and we know our performance has dropped a bit and we know we're getting a bit bored or whatever it might be, but we don't have the self-awareness to sort of say, gee, why wouldn't I stop now? When I'm at the top of my game, I'm slightly I'm a bit tired, I'm a bit burnt out. I know I'm good at what I do, but it's time for this company to go somewhere else. I've had a great opportunity, great time. They've given me, great support. And I know if I do that I'm going to get another job anyway, because people will respect me for doing that. I think there's a number of things at play, but for me, it was always, where's the footy club at? What the Sydney Swans need at this particular time? What do the Melbourne Footy Club, what are they looking for? How can I help, or how can't I help? And Sydney's a great example that, I left in 2010 and John was able to win a premiership in 2012, and I couldn't have been more proud of the footy club at that moment when, everyone was saying, the Swans are going to go down, their salary cap and all that sort of stuff, and they're on the way down. And then Horse takes them to win a premiership in 2012, and look where they are now. So I think it's being selfless, but having a really good self-awareness. I mean, if you still think you're the best person to do it, keep doing the job. But if you're not, and this little man on the shoulder is not bad. He's pretty honest, isn't he? Most of the time, said, mate, yesterday you would have got up a bit early, got into work a bit more earlier, and today you slept in a bit, or you did this. He's a pretty good barometer of whether you should or shouldn't be doing a job.
I think you touched on there about self-awareness, and I'm thinking about early in your coaching career, there were people who were critical of some of your style of defensive play, some of the trade decisions that perhaps people didn't agree with, but you stuck to your guns, and the premiership came in 2005, right? So obviously you were onto a good thing. How do you sort of keep that noise away from your inner core and stay the course into doing what it is that you need to do to get to where you need to get to?
Yeah, I mean, a leader has to have a plan, and I think part of having that plan is, the discussion with your players, with your assistant coaches. So it's really important, the assistant coaches find, we talk about having a safe work experience, work environment. Everyone feels comfortable speaking up. Brene Brown talks about a lot, psychological safety. So you've got to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable to speak up. And, when we were going through that time at Sydney, when Andrew Demetrio criticised us, we just knew we weren't playing that well. We were having discussions as a team, but the players were still confident in the game plan because we'd seen it work. And when we implemented our game plan, so again, it gets back to really rigorous reviews, rigorously reviewing your sales meeting, rigorously reviewing why you didn't meet budget, whatever that is. So for us at Sydney in the football world, we rigorously review everything we do, and we try to get better continually over and over and over and over again. And if you do that, that's all you can control. You can't control what other people who really don't have a lens into your organisation. All they really see is the share price, how many cars may have been sold, where you are on the ladder, et cetera, et cetera. So don't get outcome focused. That's my message. Don't get outcome focused. Really focus on the process. And if you get the process right, the outcomes will look after themselves.
Love that. Leaders need a plan. Good stuff. I want to ask you one last question, really, in your capacity as a former Father of the Year in Australia. And, from what I've observed on LinkedIn, you're a really great supporter of your son's endeavours. What message would you share to time-poor professionals who are really, dedicated to their business, but it comes at the expense of their families?
What I would say, firstly, let's knock on the head this notion of work-life balance. It's one of the worst terms we can actually talk about and the reason I say that is when I was coaching Sydney and going into the office, I still had a wife and 2 kids. So they were still part of my life. I wasn't Paul Roos, the football coach. And when I went home at night, I still had a job to do. We have to talk about life balance. And if we talk about life balance, then in the context of what your life is, you have much more opportunity to balance that out. The other thing I would say is don't necessarily wait for the big moments or wait for the magical holiday to Aspen or, Gold Coast or whatever it is. Little and often. Read a bedtime story. Put an hour aside to take, the kids to breakfast before dropping them off to school. Get into a cadence. And I guarantee if you get into a cadence, and I did this really well at Sydney and Melbourne, people around you will know that cadence really, really quickly, and they will understand, we don't ring Paul after 6 o'clock at night because we know that, and we know with computers now, we can do a lot of work when the kids go to bed or whatever. So start thinking of life balance. If you can duck out of the office, I used to duck out of the office and go and watch the boys run an athletic meet while they were at public school. It was 10 minutes away, drive back again. So I think it's just this notion of work-life balance is ridiculous. It's life balance. And just look at all those little opportunities that you might pass up because you sort of think, that's only an hour. I've got to wait for the weekend. Don't wait for the weekend, because when the weekend comes around, something else might come up. Take that hour, take that half an hour, take that 15 minutes and use it really, really wisely.
Thanks for that advice. I'm a new dad, so I'll make sure I take that on board. And I'm glad I didn't ask you to give me your thoughts on work-life balance, because I might have got a spray in return. Roosy, if our listeners would like to find out more about what you're doing at Performance by Design, what's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, look, I'm on LinkedIn if they want to message me directly, or just go to the website, www.performancebydesign.com. Look us up. There's a lot of really good stuff. I think you've seen some of our Culture Couch live, which we do. We also do a Culture Couch, which is on the thing as well. But it gives you a really good idea of what we do. Or, as I said, just get hold of me on LinkedIn, which a lot of people do. Shoot me a message and we'll come out and have a chat. Happy to do that.
I know there'll be some people listening to the podcast who don't usually listen because you're on. I won't ask you if you're going to coach again, but are you going to get back on the couch at Fox Footy? I miss you on there. When the media commitment's coming back?
Yeah, well, funny enough, I stopped them last year because I was going to go for the second time ever. So I started playing footy in 1980, and the only time I hadn't been involved in football was 1999 when I went overseas. And then I came back and been involved in footy. So we decided we're going to go to Europe for about 5 weeks in the middle of the footy season. And then COVID hit. So I've still got a Croatian cruise booked, actually. So look, in terms of the media, look, I really enjoy what I'm doing now. I try to travel a fair bit as well. And so I'm passionate about more the leadership stuff now. So we'll never say never, but media tend to move on pretty quickly with people and then get to the next person. I'm sure Bucks will be possibly on the couch, or Bucks will be somewhere, and maybe Clarko for a year if he doesn't coach, sort of thing. So it'll be fascinating to see where everyone ends up.
Brilliant. Well, Roosy, look, it's been a real great pleasure to speak to you. I appreciate you giving me the time. Thanks so much for being my guest on CRE Success, the podcast.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks a lot.
For more information about our guest, visit cresuccess.co/podcast. And now, a final thought from Darren Krakowiak.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Paul Roos. Thank you again, Roosy. People often ask me, what does it take to succeed in commercial real estate? And over the past year or so, I've really tried to articulate that in a few ways. There's the 5 Ps of commercial real estate success, which is an ebook I wrote when I launched CRE Success in 2020. It outlines the most common attributes of the industry's top earners. Then there was the 7 Keys to Success in Commercial Real Estate, which I presented a couple of months ago, and I actually shared that as a limited release podcast episode or episodes. That content covered the core skills you need to achieve prolific levels of performance. However, when it comes to that one thing, I've really had to spend some time reflecting on what has helped me improve over my career. I've also had a good think about what has been the most important factor I've seen as determining others' success. Now, the good news is that I've finally cracked the code. Even better, this is something that I'm sure you know about and you can definitely get better at. And the best news is that it's something that is not talked about very much in our industry. So mastering this one thing can help you become a top performer in your market. I'm building a new program that is underpinned by the one thing that will make or break your results in the modern commercial real estate industry. To be the first to know what it is, just go to cresuccess.co/the one thing. The one thing is all one word spelled out, and register, because I'm going to be holding a workshop on it, and you'll be the first to be invited to join this new program that starts next month. That's cresuccess.co/the one thing. Thanks so much for listening. I will speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening to CRE Success, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to us on your favourite podcast platform and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. For more information about the show, just check the show notes on your podcast app or visit us online at cresuccess.co.